Welcome back. We're going to start working on the triangular box, and it's actually very similar to the simple box that we had created in the beginning class. I am going to show you how to do an alternate lift tab. This one actually has binder's board that has actually been pushed through, and I think once I show you how the ribbon can be looped through, you'll get the same idea for this. But it's going to be an equilateral triangle, and we're going to, I prepared the handout from my book, but I also have the different boards pre-cut for you. So there should be a board that has a B on it for the base, an I for the inner lid, an O for the outer lid, as well as the walls. And so the first thing that we actually need to do is to cut the boards and glue them together, just like we did for the simple box. Now there are a few tools, if you have them around, they're going to be enormously helpful. A hammer of some sort, pliers possibly, and a heavier utility knife. Not required. We should still be able to get everything done with our regular craft knife, but I'm going to put those off to the side for a moment. And you can clearly go through your handouts because I am going to follow that today as we work on this project. But in terms of the boards, you'll notice they do have quite a rough edge. You're going to be utilizing your sandpaper, but going over those edges to make sure that they're nice and smooth. Now you can do this after the boards have been cut, but the nice thing is that the grain is going up and down, so that will give us a lot of strength for our box, but you do have to cut the length. And so the easiest way to go about this is to measure off from one clean edge, which I have a nice clean one on this edge. I'm going to put my other boards out for a moment, out of the way. And from here, the way that we're going to measure is that those boards are going to go on the outside edges of this. And so if we were to measure this out, this length here is 5 7/8. I'm sorry, maybe a little bit less than that. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut 6-inch sections for the length of the walls, and then what we're going to do is actually miter the corners so they fit together nice and neatly. The best way to go about this, and I'm going to try using my craft knife since that's what most of you have available. I have the grid on my self-healing mat here that I can line up my ruler, so move over 6 inches. And the only difference between the craft knife and the utility knife is that you're going to have to make more passes to get through all of that material. And the nice thing, since all the walls are even on all 3 sides, you'll be able to cut them all to the exact same width. There we go. It wasn't too bad. So from here, you're going to continue to cut. Some of you may have several different boards, but you should have enough to complete the 3 walls on this box. Once we do have those all cut, one thing that will help expedite your process, because we want to create a mitered corner, because it just looks a lot neater, it's a lot easier to cover, is that you can actually utilize your craft knife, and I'm going to hold this at an angle, and I'm just going to start trimming some of this material off just to get that angle started. And then one thing that the important thing to consider is that you'll just want to you don't want to flip this over, because then the bevel will be on the wrong side. But we're going to do the same thing for the other side, and this doesn't have to be perfect, but it's going to save you some sanding time. And so when you can see that started the bevel. Ideally what we want is a 30-degree angle, because when those two 30-degree angles meet, you're going to get a nice 60-degree angle. And so from here, you're just going to sand that edge. And you can see that it has created an even sharper tapered edge. So once we feel like we've established a good angle, you can also do this on the edge of a table and place your hand on top while you sand this. And as a reminder, your sandpaper board that was given to you, it has a rougher grit and a finer grit. So depending on how rough those edges are, you may want to try out both sides. Once we have that, all 3 of those boards cut, what we're going to do is grab a piece of wax paper, and I do have my base here, has the B on it. And so what we're going to do is we are going to glue those edges, and then we'll put rubber bands around it like we've done before for the simple box. And you'll notice that it does overextend a little bit on each corner. You do want that so those boards meet up. And so we can just use the straight PVA. Make sure all those edges are touching. Just grabbing a few rubber bands. And then at this point you can remove any of that extra adhesive just to minimize any bulk or imperfections. You can do that with a scrap piece of board or what have you. But you can see that this does create a pretty nice mitered corner. It's a lot neater. We can do some additional sanding once this is actually physically dried. Once it's dried, you can move on. And remember that it will not stick to the wax paper. I can go over any edges just to ensure that it's going to be nice and smooth, remove any glue blobs. I am doing my finer grit sandpaper so I don't tear up my boards too much. It's important to make it as smooth and even as possible, because if you have a really thin covering material that you're utilizing, it could cause problems in terms of showing some of those irregularities. You can hold on to that wax paper for something else. But once we have this form ready to go, we can identify our covering paper. And I'm going to suggest utilizing a mixture of the methylcellulose and the PVA. And what you can do is just figure out where you want to place that on the material. Make sure that pattern is face down. I'm going to glue out the base of this. And I know I'm going to come up short on one side, but I'm just going to make it work, and then I'll have to add an additional piece for the inside. But that is a-okay. So I'm centering this, trying to give myself equal weighting. Ideally, the covering material will go up the side, onto the inside, and then at least 5/8 of an inch onto the base. And I have that secured on there. I can come at this with my foam folder or Teflon folder, smoothing that out. And once that's secured, then what we're going to do is some more strategic cutting, like we did for the simple box. And so we are going to need our cheater strip. I'm going to go ahead and grab my craft knife, but you know, if you're going along with the handouts, you'll see that on one side there are going to be two extra wider portions that will be the width of the cheater strip. So as we bring this up, that'll attach to the other two sides, and then one other piece that will just attach to the adjacent side. Now you could be very systematic and do a pinwheel effect where it's flush on one side and have the overhang, but the idea is that there's going to be a little bit of overlap so that board doesn't show. And what we can do with this is utilize our triangle, so we get a nice 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to trim along that edge. Okay, so you see how this will come up, and then those two tabs will go onto the adjacent side eventually. And then on this one, I am going to go ahead and do it flush on this side. And I'm just going to trim that off so we can get rid of any excess. And then this one is going to have the 5/8 extra for the tab. And then this final side will have straight cuts from that corner out. Like so. Now for these little bits that are left over, what I suggest doing is taking a straight edge or your triangle and cutting those little bits out. Make sure sure it's nice and neat. And then we've got something to work with. I do have another box prepared and ready to go for the base. That's all pre. Okay, so from here, what I want to do is I'm going to start off with the side that actually has the 2 tabs, just because I know that that's going to go onto the other side. I've got my mixture. I'm going to go ahead and glue out this wall. Hold this back so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to slowly wrap that up. Make sure that's nice and smooth. We have that there. I'm going to turn it on end so you can see, and what I want to do with this is actually trim or just make a cut from the corner out on both sides, and that will release that material. So then what we can do is glue those 2 tabs onto the 2 adjacent sides. I know it's a little cumbersome to have all these extra side, the length of these sides on there, but it will get smaller as we go to the inside. And then from there, what I want to do is do the other side that has the other additional surface that will go onto the side. Make sure you go over that tab that was just turned over, just to ensure that the material is going to stick to it. I can turn this on end, and I'll trim out so that tab will turn over to the adjacent side. See that? And then I'll glue out this side and bring this up, and then we'll have the exterior of the box all the way covered. So now that we have this, you can see that all these sides are eventually going to go to the inside, and the best way to make this work is to tip it on the side, and I'm going to have to bend this back just so you can see what I'm doing. And just like we did on the simple box, we basically are going to cut a very skinny edge, and we'll do a mitered corner. And so I think the best way to go about this is to use your triangle, because you know that you can line that up. And when I'm cutting, I'm just coming about a board's thickness away from the edge here, and you can visually do this. A 45-degree angle is going to be fine, and there will be just ever so slight overlap by about 15 degrees. And I'll repeat that for the other side. And you'll see that when this gets glued out, you'll see that at least on the top portion, you'll have that nice mitered corner to finish that off. And then there should be skinny enough to go to the inside. And I know it's a little bit tighter than what we're accustomed to, but remember how we pushed this inside and then we creased it to find out where that where it's going to join the base. And where this line is, we can just trim this down to get rid of that excess. Now, because we are going onto the inside corners, we are going to have to create a miter. And I'm just visually doing this. I think 45 degrees again is going to be fine. But then when I go to glue this in, once it's wet, I will actually dip this in and very carefully, and then place it in and smooth one wall out at a time. I'm going to go ahead and trim the others right now. So now I have it even on all three sides. I'm going to go ahead and glue out one side, and I'll show you how to tip that in. This time I am gluing my covering material, not the inside of the box. It's going to make it more pliable. The best way to go about this is to take the ends, and the first one's the easiest, but basically you want to dip that in. So as we start to cover the interior walls, you just want to be mindful not to get any sort of adhesive onto the adjacent walls, because remember that will stain. And so as I get that in there, and make sure you got it nice and tight along that outside lip of the box. And it's okay if it overlaps a little bit. Getting those end tiers is sometimes challenging, but you just want to make sure you're using the point of your bone folder. Be careful not to tear your material. You can also use your fingers. I'm going to repeat for the other sides. I'm going to grab my Teflon folder. Now, since that adjacent side already has some material on there, if you want to, you could take some wax paper and at least line that side, the adjacent side, to ensure that you're not getting anything on there. And I'm just folding that over at the moment until I can get that put into place. If you happen to have any overhang, you can trim that once it's dry. Otherwise, you could put a little adhesive on there and then glue that down. But that basically finishes the base, the side walls, and the interior walls. We only have to cut an individual piece that will line that inside edge. And if you still have your inner lid, you can actually just base it off of that, because that is very similar to the interior dimensions. You can make it a little bit smaller. So if I'm cutting my materials to make sure it's in sync, I've got this right here. I'll lay my inner lid on here. And that's bigger than what I need, but an easy way to just shorten that up is to either grab your ruler or your cheater strip, and I'm just going to trim off about 1/8 of an inch. You can see how that's going to rest in there, and that should help hide any imperfections that I might see. You can just center that and then smooth it out. So definitely wait this out for at least an hour, if not overnight, and then you'll be all set to go. The one thing that I'd like to do is create a lid for this. And the best way to go about that is to figure out what your covering material is going to be. Now, I'm going to my board that has the O on it, and so I'm going to switch materials because I got a different box that I'm working on. And so this is my cover material for this. What I want to do is figure out where that's going to be placed on the back side of my covering material. And I chose one covering material that's a little bit heavier. And so for this, I want to overcompensate for the corners. It's very similar to how we've covered boards or covers for the accordion or the simple lid box, thinking anything like that. But definitely put this on here. Give yourself at least 5/8 of an inch. Smooth that out. Make sure there's no bubbles. You can use our cheater strip. So I have some excess for those corners, but the one thing that you need to make sure that you do is one, you want to figure out where at least a board's thickness is. I'm going to err on the side of caution and do just a little bit more, but what you can do is you've got your 30, 60, 90 degree triangle, and you can make that over run the edge there. I'm going to do that for all corners. They all get done the exact same way. So once this is all trimmed, you'll see that when I turn this over, you want to make sure that it's going to cover those corners. And you will need to pinch like we normally do for the corners, but you want to make sure you're definitely pinching towards the adjacent side. It's just going to make it a lot neater overall. And once this is complete, you'll see that it forms a nice neat triangle. And we're going to do the same thing for the inner lid as well. This happens to be the inner lid for that other box that I was working on. But I wanted to show you how to create some sort of pull tab. And so the best way to go about this is to make sure that your boards are completely dry and that they've been covered. And here we go. What we want to do, I'm going to identify some like ribbon, or if you have some excess of that, the cords that we used for the Jacob's ladder, you're welcome to use that. But essentially what you need to do is to identify, well, we're going to pretend this is covered. You're going to identify the center. And normally for ribbons or anything else that you might put on there, you want to make sure that it's just a little bit wider than the material. And so we're going to have to mark that out. And a lot of times, once I find where I want that to be, I will actually use my awl on either side to create some marks from which to cut through. And so for my purposes, I'm actually going to utilize my triangle here, and I'll remark that for myself. And I don't have anything specific in mind, but I do have some heavier lines, and then that way I know there's some symmetry in there. And then from there, what I can do is use my craft knife to cut along that edge. I'm going to turn it around and come at it from the other edge as well. Now what you can do is you can create a double slit. Or you can use this at an angle to try to remove some of that material, but essentially you do need to go through the board. Keeping in mind that you can then use your micro spatula to knock this open, so you can actually get your materials through. Now I know once this is covered, it may actually flare up that material. Don't be alarmed by that, because we can actually pound it down later. But essentially, once we get this in here, we can figure out our ribbon that we're going to utilize. I have this. You don't need a substantial amount. But I double it over, and I can actually use my micro spatula to help push this material through. This is where, if you have a pair of pliers handy, you'll be able to pull this through a little more easily. I know this one is fraying pretty badly, but it's okay. It's just for demo. So you'll definitely want to straighten this out. In fact, you can cut a slightly wider strip or make it a little more open. But essentially you want to feel or figure out where that comfortable loop is going to be. So once I have that secured, pull it through just a little bit more. What I want to do is I want to glue this out on both sides, but what I always like to do with this is to actually create an inset, which some of you may have done for other projects. And I'm just going from that edge out, and I can remove that material. I'll glue this in, and what that does is it helps to minimize some bulk. And I'm going to go ahead and do that on the other side. And this is the inside of that outer lid, so it's not as precious. I know it's going to get covered. From here, I can just put a little PVA on there. Make sure that that's sticking really well. And I'll put some PVA for the other side. Make sure that's sticking really well. I'm just pulling a little, it's overextending a little bit. But you can make sure it fits in that channel nice and neatly. You can definitely use a bone folder or your Teflon folder to make sure that that's secured. But once you feel like you've got that in place, if you have access to a hammer, you can just, while it's even still a little wet, because it does flare out from the underside, you can just pound it to flatten that material. And it's going to make it a lot easier to work with, and it will adhere to that inner lid really nicely. So it's just something to keep in mind. This is an optional item, so don't feel like you have to do this. As I showed you on this one, I had already gotten that loop in there. And so what I want to do then is my inner lid, and you can always test it out, you want to make sure that it's going to rest comfortably on the inside lip of your triangular box. And double check now, because if it gets stuck in there, you won't be able to get it out. But from here, what I'm going to do is glue the back side of my inner lid. And you'll center this. Even spacing all around. And then from here, I would flip it back over because I have the bulk of that loop. And I'm going to make sure that I'm applying some pressure, but I would also suggest weighting this. So even if you've got jars, cans of beans or something along those lines, you can put something over top to protect the surface, but making sure that it's under weights for at least an hour, if not overnight. And then once this is dry, it'll fit on top of there. You've got your nice, cool looking triangular box. Enjoy.